Rant time. Can I just say how annoying it is to me to still hear people talking about the golden age of 3D platformers, and usually they're referring to like the N64, PS1 days, Mario, Banjo, Spyro, Crash, those kinds of things. And sometimes that extends a little bit into the next generation as well, GameCube, PS2. Those are the times that people generally think of as the best for 3D platformers, understandably so, because it was one of the most popular genres of game at the time, and a lot of big games were that, whereas after those generations, 3D platformers kind of fell into obscurity, and honestly kind of died outside of like a couple of big ones like Mario. But we are no longer living in those times, and I get it to a degree. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, and I grew up in that time as well. I adored Rayman 2 as a kid, and I still have a lot of appreciation for all those older 3D platformers. However, if we're talking about the golden age of 3D platformers when the genre is doing better than it's ever done before, to me, it's no question. That is right now. Now, some people might try to make the argument that this doesn't really count in the same way because back then, 3D platformers kind of were the dominant genre of video game, and nowadays they definitely are not that. But at the same time, the gaming industry is way bigger than it was before, so even without it being one of the pillar genres of big games, the genre, I would argue, is still definitely flourishing, more so than it ever has before, because one thing you can't deny is that there's not as many of these games coming out as there used to be. Back in the day, you had the big guys doing it, but you also had all the smaller studios trying to rip off the big studios with their own 3D mascot platformer characters. So many, smaller B-grade 3D platformers were coming out all the time throughout the PS1 and PS2 generations. And I grew up on those too, and I have a lot of appreciation for them as well. I'm a big Ty the Tasmanian Tiger fan. But while there's not as many 3D platformers coming out nowadays, the ones we do get, in my opinion, are way better than the ones from before. And I'm not even really talking that much about the big ones when I say that, your Marios and your Astrobots and your Psychonauts. Those are cool too, and they're just adding on to it, but the real thing that I'm thinking of when I talk about how great 3D platformers are nowadays are the indie games. I think now having a whole generation of people that grew up playing those older kinds of 3D platformers, now they're game developers, and they want to make games inspired by the stuff that they grew up on, but they see all the problems with those kinds of games, and now they want to try to do it even better than what they loved as a kid. And I would say a lot of that is going very, very well so far. I did a whole video already talking about 3D action platformers that have really in-depth, advanced, cool movement mechanics that are really fun and you should definitely check out. But those aren't the only kinds of 3D platformers I enjoy. I also appreciate a more old-school, lax, casual approach. The good old-fashioned Collect-A-Thon. Go yourself in a sandbox, run around, do objectives, get all the things. It's a good time. Usually these kinds of games aren't that intensive on the gameplay, but they're more interested in providing a pleasant experience with nice writing, nice world and fun and atmosphere, just very cute and charming. A nice, chill, laid-back game to enjoy and relax to, and I can definitely get behind that as well every now and then. And in this video, I want to highlight a number of great indie 3D platformer Collect-A-Thons that do that job pretty well. Starting off, I'd like to highlight Super Kiwi 64. This is a very, very small game. You can beat the entire thing in less than an hour. But don't let that discourage you. The game's also only $2 or something like that, so not much of an investment of money for not that much of an investment of time. But you do get a very nice experience out of it. It's a very, very basic game. You get plopped in a world, you got 6 thingies to get, and you run around and get them all, and it does not take very long at all. But the game in general is very peppy and fast-paced. As you can see, you can do this little spinny dive move and just launch yourself around really quickly, and you can use that to peck into walls and then climb up them. You got a little glide thing, and you're just going around really fast the whole time, just sweeping through the levels, picking everything up. It's a very simple, satisfying, enjoyable little experience, and I definitely recommend it. It's by the same developer responsible for the Toree games, if you're familiar with them. Kind of similar, very small, simple, straightforward 3D platformers. But this one goes in that kind of N64 Collect-A-Thons style, you know, clearly inspired by Banjo. And it does the N64 visual style pretty well, looks fairly convincing. And as you might expect from the developer of the Toree games, there's a little bit of, like, creepy, almost horror elements to the game that are pretty fun. No, like, major jump scares or anything if you're not too good with horror, but it just has some eeriness every now and then, which, you know, N64 games would have that sometimes, so it's just being true to that style. But for a game that is even more authentic to the old-school N64 ways, I'd also like to highlight Kidz 64. This is a game very much in the same vein as Super Kiwi 64, but a lot bigger, a lot more ambitious, and I would say a lot more successful at emulating the style of what it's trying to go for. Because this is not just a general N64-esque 3D platformer, this is really specifically trying to emulate the Banjo-Kazooie games, and actually, even more specifically, it's trying to ape off of Banjo-Tooie. Which, you know, could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your taste. Tooie is kind of a somewhat divisive title, but if you do like Banjo-Tooie, then you absolutely must play Kidz 64, because this is kinda the biggest and bestest Banjo-Tooie level you've ever played. That's actually something worth noting with Kidz 64. It's not like most games where it has like many different worlds that you're going to be going to. There's only the one tutorial area at the beginning, and then the majority of the game takes place in this one world here. So it's not as big as like a full-on actual Banjo-Kazooie or a game like that. But this one level is much larger and more involved than like any single level in any Collect-A-Thon you've ever played before. As you can see looking at the game, it does a really good job of emulating that Banjo style. Like, visually, it looks just like Banjo-Kazooie in terms of the fidelity of the world and the character models and stuff. Though animation-wise, it totally, like, goes way beyond anything that you saw from games, even from, like, the following generation, really. The animation here is insanely good. But it's not just in the aesthetics that Kidz manages to authentically recreate the vibe of Banjo, it's also in the general design, like the level design style, the way this world is all laid out, the way that there are little secrets and nooks and crannies and things to interact with all over the place, the way that the world is too big and takes too long to traverse, and there's a lot of, like, annoying things that you need to, like, set everything up to let you do this one thing, which means running around back and forth and, like, setting all of the parameters correctly so you could do it, because that's another thing that Banjo-Tooie has that this game has, unfortunately. But thankfully, one thing Kidz does is it has much better gameplay and design than the Banjo games did. As much as I like those games, let's not kid ourselves, they're super duper basic and don't really offer that much in the way of real platforming. And that's something that Kidz actually does have. You have a very robust moveset here with a lot of different maneuvers you can do, lots of different types of like ledge grabbing and wall jumping and wall climbing, and they're all different kinds of ways you can interact with certain things. There's like stuff you can grab onto on walls, there's like these kind of tightrope things, but you can also like hang from them and jump to different things, climb up poles, and they utilize all this stuff really well, not just in creating interesting ways for you to traverse the open stages, but they also have these kind of linear obstacle courses every now and then, and these kinds of challenge levels that actually put these moves to the test, and they're quite fun. It's not a super duper ultra hard game or anything, but it is gonna ask a little bit more from you than these kinds of games generally do, especially older ones. But honestly, much more than your platforming prowess, this game is really gonna test your exploration abilities, because there are a lot of secrets in Kidz 64. Like, an exorbitant amount. Like, you're gonna re-explore the same area 4 times and find new things every single time, and then you'll go, okay, I found everything this time, I'm good. And then, nope, you're not. There is, in fact, still more there for you to find. Now, realistically, you're never gonna find everything in this game on your own. You're gonna need to resort to looking stuff up, because some of the secrets in this game are bonkers. Which is kind of cool, but also a little bit frustrating. I don't know, you're gonna have to determine for yourself how you feel about it if you play the game. But either way, yeah, it's a really fun game. I highly recommend it, especially if you're a big fan of the Banjo games, and maybe you're a bit unsatisfied with the efforts of Ukulele or what have you. I think this does a really good job of emulating that old-school Banjo feel very well, while also improving on that formula in some ways, but also keeping it true to how it used to be down to the N64 style and some of the problems. By the way, for anyone that ends up picking up Kidz 64, by default this game can only run at 30 frames per second at 1080p, and it has a CRT filter that it forces onto you. But on Steam, you can go into the beta branches, and there's a version of the game where you can get it up to 4K, 60 frames per second without the CRT filters, and that's much more to my preference. I just figured I'd throw that out there, because I didn't know when I first played the game, and I was like, what the heck? So there you go. Don't really know why all those options aren't just in the game by default, but whatever. Is a cool game. The one kind of major criticism that I would want to give to this game is in its complete lack of story stuff here. Not that it doesn't have a story, but it does a thing that I've started to see a little bit more frequently in certain indie games that I kind of don't like. It sort of rubs me the wrong way. This kind of energy of like, we don't care about story and we're not even gonna try and we're just like messing around basically, because the story, quote unquote, of this game is you playing as this little goat dude who has like no characterization at all, and he's dreaming, and he's supposed to have this dream where he goes and gets nachos, but then his friend like messed with the dream or whatever, so now there's all this stuff for him to run around and do. And if he does it, he gets his nachos, and he just wants his nachos, and that's your motivation for doing everything in the game. And I'm like, okay, so we're not even trying. We're not even gonna put in any effort to, like, world building or characterization or plot or anything. And not like that's some kind of unforgivable sin or anything. I actually feel that too many games focus too much on the story. But if you're gonna not even, like, put in any effort, if you're not gonna take it seriously, if you're not gonna try, don't even have anything, in my opinion, because this just feels like it's in poor taste to me. You know, there are certainly games out there that are not very story-focused, that have very little going on, but just enough to make the experience feel a little more satisfying. Something like Shovel Knight, I think, hits that balance really well. Or even I'd prefer something where they put in a lot of effort into the story, and maybe it's not even really that great, but you can tell they're trying, like the Freedom Planet games. For me, a really big part of the enjoyment of any kind of artistic medium is kind of trying to feel out where the creators were at when they were making the thing. What were they passionate about? What were they trying to do? What were they going for? Where are their inspirations coming from? And you can tell when a project has some real passion behind it, when they were really giving it their all. And you can also tell when something feels like it was churned out by a factory of people just doing their job. And so when I see a story effort like this in a game, all I can think is that the devs were like in a Discord call going, haha, wouldn't this be funny? And they went with that. And I'm sorry, but I just can't get behind it. Not a huge problem or anything. I ranted on this for longer than I probably should have. It's just something that kind of annoyed me. But regardless, yes, Kidz 64 is a really cool game, and I definitely recommend playing it. And I would also recommend Tinykin, especially for those Pikmin fans out there. Now don't get too excited. This is not a Dandori-style real-time strategy time management game. It is definitely a 3D platformer collect-a-thon, but with some light Pikmin inspiration. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The premise of this game is that you're a tiny little dude, and you come to this strange, mysterious alien world of Earth, and you end up getting stuck on here and have to build a machine that will help you get off of Earth. And you end up befriending these tiny little dudes called Tinykin, and you end up controlling an army of them, telling them what to do to help you along your journey. I know, totally original, nothing like anything you've ever seen before. But what makes this game stand out is that instead of having to work against the clock and manage all these different dudes to multitask things, instead it's all in the service of exploration. That is really the name of the game here. When I say that this is a 3D platformer collect-a-thon, that is what this game is. That is literally the only thing you do. You got these huge levels all taking place inside this one house, and each different room of the house is a level, which is pretty fun. And there's stuff everywhere. Go collect all of it. And some of these things are going to require you to rely on the Tinykin to interact with them. And there are different types of Tinykin that have different abilities. For example, pink ones can carry stuff around, red ones are explosive and can either destroy things or light fires. Green ones you can climb like a ladder to get some extra height, and so on and so forth. And to get Tinykin, you, like everything in this game, have to collect them. You find their, like, eggs or whatever scattered around, you grab those, and that adds one more Tinykin of that color to your army. So you might find situations where there's a thing that you need to carry, but you need 25 pink Tinykin to carry it, and you don't have enough. So you're gonna have to leave and do some more exploring and find some more, and then come back later. And each room has its own grouping of Tinykin. You can't carry them between levels, so you're always gonna start back at 0 and have to rebuild up your army. And as you start to get more types, it also gets, more diverse. You're gonna have to get lots of different types of Tinykin in different colors, so you're gonna have to, really figure out what you gotta do in what order. And you also have different objectives to aim for, like main quests, where you gotta do some stuff for some NPCs, or side quests, or whatever, but really, ultimately, everything in this game boils down to explore around, interact with stuff, collect things, and you'll achieve everything there is to do. Fortunately, that's fine, because this game just feels great to move around in. It's very simple, doesn't have any, crazy schmovement or nothing, but you got this little bar of soap that you can ride on for some fast movement, kind of like a skateboard thing. And it kind of has a similar feel to a Super Kiwi 64 in that it's just real fast, real satisfying. It's just enjoyable to move around this world. And there's stuff everywhere, and it's just a good time to get the stuff. So you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and then the game is over eventually. And if you haven't been able to tell, the vibes are very strong with this one. This is a pretty cozy game. I love the fact that you're a little dude in this big world. I love that it all takes place inside this one house. It's got a very nice atmosphere to it. Reminds me a lot of Disney's Extreme Skate Adventure or whatever on the GameCube when you're doing the Andy's house level. Real ones know what I'm talking about. What can I say? I like being a tiny dude in a big world. It works in Pikmin, it works in Bug Fables, and it works here as well. I love just paying attention to all the little world details. Everything is some kind of logical thing that would exist in a house. All the platforms, all the houses, all the buildings, all the furniture. It's all taking, real things and just rearranging them into fun little ways. And, the little societies and the cultures that have been built out here. There's lots of cute little things. You go inside the guitar and they've set up, a little music restaurant here. And that's really cute. And actually, now that I think about it, this game is a nice contrast to Corn Kid 64 when it comes to putting in the effort for your narrative elements in a game like this. Because this is also not a very story-heavy game, but they did put a little bit in there that is kind of nice and something you can appreciate because, you're jumping around inside someone's house here, but this isn't just a generic house in a game. This is someone's house, and if you pay attention to details, you can figure that out, and there are things that hint to, who these people were and what their lives were like, and it ultimately does end up tying into the story in a very nice little way, and I appreciated that. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. I'm not looking for this life-changing story or whatever in a game like this, but just give me something that makes me go, oh, that was nice. But now, for something that is not nice at all, let's talk about Hell Pie. Disclaimer, this game is really grotesque and gross and juvenile. This is one of those things where it's quote-unquote mature, but they use their mature rating in the most immature way possible. And I know some people are into that. But personally, I cannot get behind just filling your game or your show or whatever with as many sex jokes and vulgarity and gore and poop and pee humor as you can. It's not my thing. I find it very unappealing, and this entire game is nothing but that. So if that's a deal breaker for you, I wouldn't blame you at all. It was almost kind of a deal breaker for me, but thankfully, at the very least, the game is pretty fun. This game takes a similar approach to Super Mario Odyssey, actually, where you have these massive sprawling levels and a really powerful movement toolset that lets you destroy everything. In fact, a bit too much so. It's not too bad at the early stages of the game, but as you get further, you have this whole skill tree system that gives you more and more abilities and moves and more ways to go crazy. And eventually it does turn to a point where you're barely even playing the game because you can just fly over everything. But it's still relatively satisfying and enjoyable, so it's not the worst thing ever. But if you're looking for tight platforming challenges that are going to really take advantage of your moveset, you're not going to find that here. The main appeal of this game for me was just enjoying the freedom of the movement. Feels pretty good to do everything in this game. You got a swing grapple that you can do off of nothing in the air, and you can do multiple swings in a row, and you got this dash power-up that you can use whenever you want to cross massive distances. And depending on when you release your swing, you can either go further or higher, so it lets you mess around with things in cool ways, as well as some other moves you get to expand out your options and let you go even more crazy. It is pretty cool, and I would say it mostly manages to hold you over for the duration of the game, except for one aspect that I think is relatively weak here. You have the big sandbox areas where you're just going around and collecting things, and that's pretty good. But you also have a number of like smaller sub-areas that act as kind of like linear levels, and with the movement of this game being as crazy powerful as it is, these are far from obstacle courses. You barely have to put in any effort to clear these. And because of that, I felt that these sections of the game were pretty weak, and they generally go on for pretty long, so it kind of feels like you end up doing this much weaker section of gameplay somewhat frequently when you'd really rather go back to the more open sandbox levels, because that's where the really enjoyable stuff is. You know, Penny's big breakaway, this is not. If we're talking about, like, linear challenge-based grappling games, that's much better. This is much more enjoyable in the freeform style. Not that the linear levels are terrible, per se, but they're not especially strong. In many ways, this game does feel like those kinds of B-grade 3D platformers from, like, the GameCube, PS2, Xbox days, where you can definitely feel that they don't have everything 100% locked down in the best way possible, and there's some really basic and not, like, amazing design in there. But like those older games, it manages to all kinda come together to something that is decently enjoyable, and I would still recommend it if you're a big fan of Collect-A-Thons. But now we move on to the final game of this video, which is not just my favorite one in this set. In fact, it's not just my favorite Collect-A-Thon, or even one of my favorite 3D platformers. This game is one of my favorite games I've ever played in my entire life. It's A Hat in Time. Do I even need to talk about A Hat in Time? I feel like anyone that pays attention to indie games and 3D platformers knows about A Hat in Time and has probably played it. As I said at the beginning of this video, I grew up on 3D platformers, especially ones from the GameCube PS2 era. That was the prime of my childhood days playing these kinds of games. And A Hat in Time is such a wonderful send-up to not just 3D platformers of old, and, you know, the big ones, your Marios, your Banjos, whatever, but also all those B-grade 3D platformers that weren't as great. You can tell there's a lot of love for those games in here as well. There's so many references to so many 3D platformers in here, both in obvious ways and more subtle ones that you gotta know to know. But what's great about A Hat in Time is that it's not just a send-up to all the games you grew up with as a kid, and it's trying to recreate the experience of Mario Sunshine or whatever. It is a game that takes all those things from all those games back in the day and learns lessons from them and improves upon the things that they did both well and poorly. It is a game that really hones in on what made those games fun, what made them enjoyable, what made them worth playing, and it brings those elements to life better than anything I've ever played. I vividly remember my first playthrough of A Hat in Time. It was nothing short of what I would call magical. It's a wonderful experience. And actually, this game came out very shortly before Super Mario Odyssey, and I remember thinking going into that game, like, man, how on earth is this possibly going to top A Hat in Time? Like, I'm comparing Mario, the King of the Castle, to this little indie game that came out, and I didn't even hear about it before release, but I saw it on Steam and it had overwhelmingly positive reviews. I'm like, what the heck is this? Let me check it out, and my world was completely changed forever, because A Hat in Time is truly something special. I cannot describe how wonderful it is enough, but here's the thing. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details of why it's such a wonderful experience, because you really should play it for yourself if you haven't. It's a game I really don't want to spoil for anyone, because like I said, that first-time experience for me was so wonderful, and I've since replayed A Hat in Time, and it's still a fantastic game, and I love it, but it's just not the same, man. It'll never be the same as your first time experiencing everything this game has to offer. But I can at least give you the overview of what this game is and why it's so nice. Because A Hat in Time, I'll tell you right now, it's not the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, it's perfectly good, it's fine, it's adequate, it's enjoyable, but it's not some, like, incredible, amazing, super well-designed 3D platformer with crazy cool movement mechanics and all this in-depth level design. It's not that kind of game. It's a very basic, by-the-numbers game. You got a jump, and a double jump, and a dive you can do, and that's, for the most part, pretty much it, and you have very simple, straightforward platforming design, nothing that you haven't seen before elsewhere, nothing that's really even that much more exceptionally better than what you've seen elsewhere. You don't play this game for the gameplay. The game is fun, but the real thing you come to A Hat in Time for is the charm, the cuteness, the writing. A Hat in Time doesn't really have much of a story, and it doesn't need one. It's not focusing on that. What A Hat in Time really does well is putting you in lots of fun, kooky little scenarios and playing around with that to get laughs out of you and just to make the experience so pleasant and lovely.
And thank you for agreeing to the terms and conditions on the backside of the blackboard.
Again, I don't want to show very much because I don't want to spoil things, but something I want to point out is that this game actually uses the older Mario style of Collect-A-Thon structure, where every time you get the main collectible in this game, it boots you out of the level and you have to load back in. And at first you're like, what the heck are you doing, A Hat in Time? Everyone knows that the Banjo style is so much better, where you just get plopped in the sandbox and you just get to run around and do whatever you want. But then this game totally makes it work because you never know what you're going to be doing in this game. Each little mission in A Hat in Time is not just some objective for you to pursue, some platforming challenge you gotta conquer, whatever. It's like a little episode of a cartoon or something where there's some whole new scenario and you're put in this crazy situation unlike anything you've done anywhere else in the game. You're like, what the heck? This is super cool. One of the small little details that really emphasizes that and just makes this game feel all that much more wonderful is every single mission in the game has its own loading screen artwork, which feels like the title card of this episode before things get going. Oh, it's just so good. And they managed to bring all these little fun scenarios to life with such great writing. There are so many good jokes in A Hat in Time, which I find is pretty rare for games. You know, a lot of games these days try to infuse general humor and lightheartedness into things, but not that many games, like, really deliberately go for, like, lots of comedy, but A Hat in Time does, and it nails it really hard. This game is so funny, and it just adds to the charm of the whole experience, and it's so great because, again, I don't want to spoil things, but the game has lots of scenarios where it's not just the game being funny and cute and charming, it gives you as the player opportunities to be funny and cute and charming. So it really feels like you're participating in this little episode of this cartoon here. The game knows that you as the player, you're an active participant in making this show work, and it really tries to get you involved in really great ways. To make some comparisons that might give you a more solid idea of what this game is like in terms of its tone and style and writing, think like a cross between like Psychonauts and Paper Mario, and that's pretty much exactly where this game lives. Again, there's a lot of stuff that you can see is directly influenced by those kinds of games. And those are some high bars to hold this game to the standards of, but I'd say it easily manages to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. Seriously, if you haven't, you must play A Hat in Time. Again, thinking back to my first playthrough, I remember when I finished this game thinking every child on planet Earth should be forced to play A Hat in Time, because it's just such a joyous experience. If I grew up with this game as a kid, my god, that would have been amazing. But I am also capable of criticizing A Hat in Time too, because I do think this game has at least one kind of not major issue, but something I do think is worth mentioning here. As I said, A Hat in Time is not really a game you play for the gameplay. It knows that that's not really the strong suit of what these kinds of 3D platformers were doing back in the day, and it's not what it's trying to do. It's clearly trying to take what these kinds of games did do really well and just refining that and delivering the best version of it that it can, and that's where it really succeeds. But there are some things in this game where it's not trying to do that, and it is trying to offer a solid gameplay experience, And I understand wanting to do that because it is a game and you want to have enjoyable gameplay and whatever. But when it does this, I feel like the game is completely losing track of why I'm even here. Towards the end of the game with like the last world and some of the DLC stuff, they introduce a lot more gameplay focus on stuff, and you don't get nearly as many like fun scenarios and cute writing and all the comedy, like all the stuff the game had been doing up to that point. It kind of takes a back seat to just more general gameplay and platforming. And again, it's good, it's fun, but I'm not playing a hat in time for obstacle course challenges that I need to conquer. Especially with the DLC in this game, they introduced the Death Wish mode, which is like a challenge mode where you revisit many of the missions in the game, but now they add some extra difficulty to them, remix the missions in some way, and you play it again, and now you gotta do it under a time limit, and you have these extra objectives to go for, and it's really, really hard. And I'm just like, what is this? What are we doing here? Why did you put this in the game? I would have much preferred just more normal missions of fun scenarios. And even the whole final world of the game, it has a cool aesthetic, kind of in like a stylish, modern, like Splatoon kind of thing, and there is a lot of charm in there, but all the main missions are just these platforming sequences, and you're just like, but why am I not, like, organizing some big heist, and I need to recruit all these NPCs that are gonna help me along the way, and then we do the big job, and I break into the bank as a big platforming stage, but then I get caught, and I get thrown in prison, and now I gotta organize, like, a prison riot to escape, and, like, all the fun stuff that A Hat in Time has been doing the whole time, and it just stops, and I'm like, why did it stop? That was really good, I want more of that, please. Yeah, I don't know, it's really weird, and it kind of deflates the magic that this game has for so much of it, but that doesn't really harm the experience that much. Still very good, still very enjoyable, and like I said, there is still a good amount of cuteness in there. Just feels like they kind of lost the plot a little bit at some point. Regardless, though, A Hat in Time is a must-play. This game is beyond incredible. I adore it to death. It's one of my favorite games I've ever played, because it's just everything that I loved as a child, but so much better than it ever was before. And all this, not just A Hat in Time, but all the games featured in this video, all accomplished by small indie teams. It might not be the golden age of 3D platformers in the sense that all the big studios aren't making them anymore, but I don't think we even need that. Indie developers are more than capable of delivering these fantastic, full experiences that I don't even feel like we're missing out on much by not having that many AAA 3D platformers. And every now and then we do get one, and it's great as well, so I'm good. And keep in mind, this is only a small selection of great 3D indie platformers that have been coming out in recent years. I've covered many others in other videos on my channel, so if you're looking for even more awesome games, then you can definitely find them here. And there are many other 3D platformers coming in the future that look really cool that I'm keeping my eye on, and you can be sure I'll be covering them on the channel when they come out. So if you're a big fan of cool 3D platformers and you want to keep up to date on all the best ones coming out, then stick around, because I'll be there, and I hope to see you there as well.